And I should be live now, hopefully. So, starting with a cough. Just make sure everything's on. Normally on means turning on. So far there's no one watching. With any luck, some people will come and join me over here. Yeah, everything's working. And there's 4 people watching. So, hello. This is just another random live stream for no particular purpose. Just me coming on here to be here to have a general just chat. You know, many of us are trying to find things to do each day, so this is something to do. That's okay. Hello, everyone who's saying hi over at the side. So there's a delay. I wonder how much of a delay. There's probably a delay from YouTube buffering to make sure everyone kind of sees everything okay, so that my face doesn't suddenly sort of freeze in a funny position. Thank you. So anyone who is watching this and not subscribed to my channel, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you end up finding this interesting, helpful, or anything like that, feel free to give it a thumbs up. This is literally like last night. It's just me having a bit of a chat with you, seeing how we can fill some time and avoiding any conversations about anything that might be going on in the world. So yes, hello. So I don't have anything specific to talk about. We'll just see who comes and joins us. There's quite a few people last night. So yeah, I think there's just a few seconds delay, but nothing significant. So again, for those who didn't notice, I've got a different backdrop here. Yeah, I've got enough books that I could do show and tell for probably a year and still not get through all the books, just literally around me where I'm sitting. Yep. So yeah, coffee break, that's good. I've just got a water. I've often thought I've got a video teaching how I do my stories. So I can talk about that briefly here. But yeah, I've got a video because I teach obviously therapists how to do storytelling, sort of therapeutic storytelling. I've got an e-course that teaches how to do it, and I've taught it live, obviously, teach it as part of diploma, things like that. And so there's a slight difference between how I do my stories here online versus how I do them in therapy. I spoke about this briefly yesterday, that how I do them in therapy is I get all the ideas from the clients. You know, the client will sit opposite you, they give you all the content, you then take the content that they give you and you turn that content into something therapeutic. So you learn the pattern of their problem, the pattern of the solution to their problem. You learn the metaphors that they use to describe their problems, and then you take those so that's physical metaphors as well as what they perhaps say, and you then turn all that into sort of the therapy for them. Difficult one to answer whether I have insomnia or not. I frequently struggle to sleep, but then when I'm tired, I usually fall asleep. And I definitely get tired far more now that I'm older, rather than when I was up until my 30s or whatever. I don't have a favorite pizza. I don't have a favorite anything. really like that. I don't really do favorite things. Um, so food is just something you stick into your face to give yourself energy. It doesn't really serve any other purpose, as far as I'm aware. Um, but yeah, I'm just trying to see what's cropping up over here. So yeah, so when I'm doing stories for like meditations online, obviously I have to do them in a different way because I can't see who's giving me the who's going to be listening to it and who it's tailored for. And so I know what I want to cover. I know what kind of I want to make sure that it addresses stress for the majority of my stories, that it addresses stress, anxiety, and um, worry. So I know I want the metaphors to be all focused on therapeutic stuff that helps in those areas. And then I just obviously integrate those therapeutic metaphors into whatever I'm doing. Obviously, when I do the stories based on ideas from yourselves, where I do my sleep stories live streams every Monday, for those, it is ideas from yourselves. You just throw ideas out at me. I then take those ideas, rejig them around, and figure out a way of linking them together, sort of just reading it off the page. And then, just like you do in a therapy session in real time, you create something with the content you've got. And rather than having it person specific, like, oh, this is for Holly, as I see hello there. Rather than it being like, this is for so and so, you have to think this has got to be generic. It's got to be for whoever's listening. So some bits which is why I can make quite a diverse range of stories, and then people can sort of think, oh, the metaphors, the way they're used in that resonates with me. I like those topics. This one didn't resonate with me. I'm not a fan of these topics. And so people just naturally get drawn to the type of therapy, so to speak, that suits them. So yeah, ways of dealing with insomnia. I've done quite a lot around insomnia in books and videos and things. The main thing is making sure that you have obviously good sleep, kind of a whole sleep process. So things like not taking any stimulants, including things like coffee and what have you, um, from say 5-6 hours before bedtime, making sure that you turn down all the lights a number of hours before bedtime and just put smaller lights on so that you're not continuing to trigger a kind of the sort of being awake kind of response. Um, Depending on the cause of the insomnia, it could be that you write lots of things down. So one thing that happens with insomnia frequently, so this is more for people who wake up through the night rather than people struggling to fall asleep, although it does happen to people who struggle to fall asleep as well, is that you end up over dreaming, and that keeps waking you up because your brain says you've got to stop dreaming. You're dreaming too much, and so you keep getting woken up because you need to stop that dreaming. And the dreaming, one of the easiest ways to stop the over dreaming is to make sure that everything that runs through your mind before you go to bed, you write it down. I can see a hair hanging down somewhere on my face here. You write everything down that is going through your head, and then you write resolutions to everything down. So any worries or anything that come up, you write down a resolution. So the idea is that when you're over dreaming, it's because during the day it's like having a computer, like my computer, where you have 1,000,001 tabs open, like my computer, and it then ends up crashing on you because it can't cope with the fact that everything is open on it, and then you lose all your work. So dreaming is like closing, sort of saving all the tabs at regular intervals, all the bits of work, and closing things down. And so if you go to bed with loads of tabs open, you then end up over dreaming. So what you can do is strategies like writing things down before bed, including the solution to it. And if there isn't a solution, writing down that there's nothing I can do about this. So yeah, there's just different bits and pieces you can do sort of psychologically um, around just the sleep part that increase the chance of sleeping. Obviously, including things like one of the most commonly set tasks that I'll set people is don't go to sleep. Whatever you do not go to sleep. And if someone tells me I only get like 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, I'll explain that by following this task, you're only going to lose 2 or 3 hours sleep a night because that's all you do anyway. You're only going to lose 2 or 3 hours sleep a night. So go to bed at say 10 p.m. or whatever time is your bedtime. If you're not asleep within say 20 minutes, get up, do something, and don't go back to bed. Even if you get tired, don't go back to bed, and then get on with your day the next day like normal. Don't So it's ideal to do this if it's like a time when you're not going to have to drive the next day or anything like that. um just crack on with your day like normal. Don't nap during the day or anything like that. Crack on with your day, and at your bedtime the next night, go to bed. And normally, obviously, I give more instructions, and it's always tailored to that specific individual and their problem as they've got it. um but doing something like that helps to reset the sleep pattern, but also it works into the way we psychologically work. So in children's homes, it would be common to say when the kids would say, "Oh, I'm not going to bed," and they'd start kind of having a go at you, and you say, "Okay, stay up all night, and I'll give you £10 in the morning," and then you just walk away from them, and they'll be so desperate to stay awake they fall asleep. In the same way that if you're desperate to stay awake for a film very late at night, it's more likely that you're going to fall asleep because you're trying to stay awake. If you need to wake up early and so you try and fall asleep, it's more likely that you're not going to be able to sleep now and you're going to be stuck staying awake. So just the way our brains work around these things, you can set tasks or set yourself certain tasks and ways of addressing this. I did do a whole course on insomnia, but I don't know if I think I put some of it on YouTube, but I don't know if I put all of it on YouTube. Let's have a look. Da, 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 da. How's there already a thumbs down? I haven't done anything. Yeah, I thought the thumbnail. I don't want to have to go because I'm doing these kind of impromptu. I'm just turning up here and doing it to keep everyone company. To do something here. I didn't want to go and to the effort of making a thumbnail that takes me time. So I thought yesterday I can't even remember what I did. I did something. Oh yeah, the hourglass. So today I thought I'll just get Picard and just use him. I just thought, what can I do that I can just make a quick thumbnail with, rather than doing the or whatever it is that YouTubers do. But yeah, people overdream if they worry a lot. It is Jean-Luc Picard drinking Earl Grey hot. Yeah, so normally you have a sleep cycle that's approximately 90-ish to 120-ish minute periods of time through the night, where the dreaming gets slightly longer. So the REM part gets slightly longer as the night goes on, and it's at its longest by the time you're reaching the morning again. But if you overdream, you don't get the stage 3, stage 4 sleep. You don't get the deep physical recuperative sleep. And dreaming is almost as active as being wide awake. So you end up waking up absolutely exhausted because you've actually spent your entire night virtually doing all of the overdreaming, trying to close all the patterns from the day, from all of perhaps worrying that you've done or overthinking that you've done. You've got so much to try and deal with, like someone saying, here's all the paperwork from today, get on with it. And you're thinking, why didn't all that paperwork get done during the day? And they just say, oh, we thought we'd leave it all to you at the end of the night. So you end up over dreaming, but because you're dreaming too much, your brain wants the deep sleep. And so it ends up, one of the easiest ways to wake someone up is at that point where you're dreaming. The deeper asleep you are, the harder it is to wake you up. So at the dreaming part of your sleep, that's when you're quite close to being awake anyway. that's when you're likely to, perhaps if you heard a sound, you'll incorporate it into your dreams, things like that. Um, so yeah, so if you end up over dreaming, not only do you then end up exhausted because you've spent more of the night dreaming than you've spent actually trying to relax and make your body sort of fix itself and stuff. Um, but because your body isn't doing all the physical stuff that it needs to do, you're then more likely to end up getting ill from things. You're more likely to have inflammation, more likely to have all the sort of health issues that go with not actually having your body functioning correctly. Um, all of my stories I make up as I go along. I've never written a story ahead of time. Um, it doesn't work, or my brain doesn't work like that. So let's have a look. Just trying to make sure I read everything. So then, if I end up not reading something, then just feel free to re-comment it. Um, yeah, it wasn't me wearing a mask, not this time. Yeah, I hope someone did press it by mistake, a thumbs down. I'm assuming if they didn't like it, they left as soon as they disliked it. But I don't know what I said in the first 5 minutes or whatever that would have upset anyone other than hello. Maybe it was my face. You can't forget someone using things like hypnosis or whatever. You can do things like help someone to go through the grieving process more fully. Um, so, for example, say somebody had had a relationship breakup, and it's perfectly natural if you had a relationship breakup that perhaps 6 months later, say it was a really kind of meaningful relationship to you, 6 months later, a year later, it'd be perfectly fine if you're still kind of every now and then uh, thinking about that person and not quite over them. That'd be quite normal for some people. So you can move on much quicker. But likewise, it is normal that some people, I've worked with people who've been obviously in long term marriages and things, and then suddenly it's turned out their partner was cheating on them, the relationship's ended, but because of it ending really quickly, not through like fighting and stuff that made them kind of think, oh, we shouldn't be together, it was quite abrupt. They were still deeply in love at that moment that everything happened, and yet now they're suddenly single, but still deeply in love with this person despite what the person has done. And they don't necessarily want to be with the person, but they haven't kind of separated from them. And I wouldn't help someone through that until they've gone through the grieving for a period of time, to give time for the grieving to happen. I wouldn't want to um, do something that kind of makes light of someone's own natural way of them grieving. Um, but I've had people who've come to me like a year later or whatever and said, I still check their Facebook. I still want to know what they're up to. I still want to keep an eye on them, etc., etc. And for people like that, what you can do is you can remove the emotion. So you can use various psychological techniques to help people to be able to essentially go through what is supposed to happen with the grieving, where they kind of detach from the strong emotion. So you still know those memories were happy, those memories were sad, etc., all this sort of stuff. Just like when someone dies, you still know when you think about them which were the happy memories and sad memories, and you still feel, oh, I kind of miss them or whatever, but it doesn't make you end up in floods of tears or whatever. And so that's kind of what you're doing, and there are techniques to do that, but you can't really just make someone totally wipe someone from their mind. um, yeah, I always suspect that most people on my channel are likely to be insomniacs. Yeah, I do get thumbs down on videos, um, often within minutes, sometimes quicker, of them going live, um, as if someone literally waited for my video to get posted just so that they could stick a thumbs down on it. But the fact that you've got to click on the video to get to the thumbs down bit, you know, it's not like just scrolling past it. You've got to actually click on the video, get to the thumbs down, and click thumbs down. Um, you think, who's going on there that I haven't even had time, assuming that they're watching it, I haven't had time to say or do anything for them to just make a judgment on whether they like or dislike what I've done. Um, I don't let it sort of bother me, obviously, but it does confuse me who goes to that much effort for it. Um, to stop over dreaming, part of it is identifying what it is that you're perhaps having the overdreaming caused by. So obviously there are some times where it can be a misfiring, uh, perhaps of neurons. So there can be obviously some biological things that could be causing it, but generally the most common thing is overthinking, and the worst kind of dreaming is where what you've been overthinking or perhaps worrying about, because it can be positive overthinking as well. So I normally get that, not negative overthinking. um so overthinking, and so you're dreaming, you're closing the patterns from the day. So say you wake up and think, oh god, it's so early, I don't want to be up yet, and you're already worrying about things. That's something that you have to have resolved at some point. um if it's then, I bet I'm going to get stuck in traffic, and I bet this and I bet that, and you're already worrying now, you haven't even say left your front door, all of this stacks up, and then you end up getting to uh, bedtime, and your brain is going to have to close every single one of those patterns. It's like, as I sort of mentioned a bit earlier, um, not exactly this, but I did mention kind of this. It's like someone opening a new Word document on a PC every single time. So say you just sit at a computer for 24 hours, and or say 15 hours of being awake or something, and you open a Word document every single time you have a thought that's unresolved, like, oh, I bet they hate me. You don't know that someone hates you necessarily. You're just making that judgment of them. And so you've triggered that sort of thinking. And the more emotional it is, the more everything in your dreams is heightened, emotion wise. So the more emotional it is during the day, it's incredibly more emotional at night. So if someone annoys you and you think, I'm getting irritated by you during the day, when you have a dream, you might get angry in the dream. You might experience beating someone up, or you might experience smashing something to pieces, or you might experience, I don't know, aggressively playing a sport, say American football, and charging along, bashing people down, or rugby over here in the UK, or kicking a ball really hard, or something. If something made you nervous during the day, so maybe you were told, um, oh, if we need you to, would you be able to stand up in the staff meeting and present this piece of work? And you don't end up doing it, but suddenly your brain is thinking, oh, that's so scary, I don't know if I can do that. And you're a little bit panicky, but not anything you can't handle. And then it gets to bedtime, and that little bit panicky ends up being that you have a nightmare, because it feels terror in the dream. And so if you end up waking up during that, you feel like you've just woken up from terror. Um, and so that's kind of what's going on when you're dreaming, and you need to close all these patterns, so you need to keep dreaming all of this stuff. So the more you've got to close, the more dreaming you end up doing. The less you've got to close, so the more balanced you are during the day, the more you kind of close off as you go, the more you um, kind of deal with whatever it is you've got to deal with. So I always sort of explain that worry is the first half of a natural cycle. Worry is the kind of identifying risks part. Worry would be, this bad thing could happen. or whatever it happens to be, and then you want what's the solution. And so it's kind of like people worrying are doing the first half and forgetting to do the second half. They're identifying threats and risks, but they're not then moving on to the solutions or the analysis stage of, is that really a risk? Oh no, that's not. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. We can put that aside. um, but it's doing that second part that then significantly helps with the dreaming. um, but that's not necessarily, it's easy to say, it's not necessarily easy to do, especially if you're someone who kind of finds yourself instinctively worrying. So part of it is about then learning that, or having support to be able to go through and mentally rehearse it. And obviously I cover a lot of this in every single sleep story that I make. Let's have a look. I don't believe that we have not seen any evidence that we travel to other realms or out of our bodies in our sleep. I know that most people have probably had the experience as if you do. And obviously, as a storytelling thing, I do things like that within my stories. I pretty much don't visualize. It's incredibly rare for me to visualize. Um, when my eyes are closed, the main thing I see is black. And my assumption has always been that most people, that's their experience, because I rarely encounter someone who sees anything more than glimpses or having a sense of something. That's kind of how most people describe it to me when I talk to them about it. Um, so I've always envied people who have this really good kind of inner world where they can create visualizations and stuff. Um, I can have a sense of it, but it's more a felt. So we had this conversation over in the Facebook group a few weeks back, where I was trying to. It had come up, I think, on one of the live story streams, and then I carried it on over, and I think it, or the conversation carried on, and I joined in over on Facebook, saying that it's difficult to explain, but it's kind of a sensed thing. It's almost like a feeling of being aware of things, not actually seeing something, and that I normally need special equipment for myself to visualize. So, like the light sound machines, where you put the mask on that has flashing lights in front of your eyes, so that your brain has some stimulation, external stimulation to work with, that it can then, that's random patterns of light flashing, and then it takes that random light flashing and turns it into whatever the thing is you're trying to imagine. The same, like personally, I used to always make my sleep meditations for myself, and any self hypnosis stuff that I ever used to do with sound effects, because then having the auditory part there would help me to stimulate some visual stuff. Once I start getting into the fact that with headphones on, it sounds like I'm perhaps lying in a tent with rain on the tent or something. Um, and so that's kind of what I would do and what would work for me. And obviously, I stopped doing that on YouTube for years. Now I do it, go through my back catalogue, adding them to YouTube with sound effects. But I'm doing that for myself, not for anyone else. So I do it to my tastes and my liking, and then just share it with YouTube for anyone else who might also end up finding that helpful. But yeah, I'm someone who doesn't really visualize. Um, Generally, the research seems to be that generally people who struggle with visualizing also worry far less, because they can't they don't create stuff that seems so real in their heads, if that makes sense. If you close your eyes and you see some big scary kind of audience in front of you, as if that presentation you're thinking about having to give is happening in your mind, that's scary. If when you close your eyes you just see black when you're thinking about the presentation, that's not so scary. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally, people who, and this is one of the issues around stage hypnosis, that in the 90s there was a lot of research done on this area, because there were stage hypnotists, obviously people saying, I went to a stage hypnotist and this happened and I ended up having this bad experience. And so there's a lot of trying to look into this subject, and people who are very, very good at kind of building up mental images and having a brilliant imaginative world within their minds are also people who are very good at being hypnotized, because they can create this reality for themselves. But they're also the people who are most likely to have anxiety, depression, and sort of issues around those kind of areas. Um, and so that makes it that the people who are most receptive to what you're doing, say as a stage hypnotist, are also the ones who are most at risk of what you're doing if you accidentally say or do the wrong thing and trigger something in them that you didn't even know, because you haven't gone into detail with that individual. You've just asked people to come up off, from an audience. Um, I'm just trying to read through the comments. Yeah, generally, if someone keeps having recurring dreams, if it's different nightmares, then it's probably a case of constantly finding yourself worrying about things. But if it's the same nightmare, then the chances are there's an issue that you're thinking about that's the same issue. So you might be thinking about it slightly different, but there's the same issue that keeps being thought about every day that you have that nightmare that night. Um, so again, I'm just saying the chances are, it's not a guaranteed thing, but it is very common that if your brain is having the same dream, it's kind of using the same dream to close the same pattern. So, for example, if for years and years you always worry about the same type of thing, then that same thing keeps cropping up, keeps not getting resolved every single day virtually. And then every night you're dreaming to keep trying to resolve the thing that you're not resolving. Um, but if it's generally that you have nightmares that are perhaps different, then it could be that you just during the day have very, very emotional rumination, very emotional worrying, or unresolved things. So, for example, if you worry what people think of you, or if you um, worry about whether you're going to, that you're going to make a mistake or whatever it is, if there's something in your life where you're always having that sort of quite a lot of emotion during the day around something, that probably is what's behind it. Sort of anxiety emotion, that's probably the thing that a therapist would then work on. They would sort of help you to address that, because they'd recognize that that is likely to be the thing behind it. I'm just having a look, just seeing what's written over here. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I don't know. Some of them could somehow, I don't know if there is a process for artificially generating thumbs down, but I'm sure some tech person somewhere might do that. I don't know what the no, I would not is to. It might explain it somewhere down here. If you very rarely experience emotions during dreams, which I very rarely experience emotions during dreams, the chances are that there's not a lot emotionally unresolved going on during the day. Um, it could be the case that it just happens to be the dreams that you're remembering aren't really emotional. Given that you dream roughly every 90 minutes to 2 hours, sort of initially for a short period of time, but it extends as you get later into the night and then further into the morning. Um, but you've had a number of dreams by the time you reach the morning, if you've gone to bed and got, say, an 8 hour night or a 6 hour night or something. So it could be that either the emotional dreams happened earlier in the night, or happened at times you didn't remember, or it could be that probably a bit like me, you just didn't do any emotional kind of unresolved stuff during the day. So I don't particularly uh, have much unresolved emotional stuff that goes on for me. Um, da, 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 da. All our dreams are metaphorical in some way or another. Pretty much. Obviously, I say pretty much because there's bound to be exceptions. But again, the sort of science that I've seen, at least, seems to point that when people describe their dreams, they're largely metaphorical, even when they seem quite unmetaphorical, if that makes sense. So, say for example, someone had me in their dream, it could be that I was in the dream, but wearing something you've never seen me wearing. So that's a metaphor of me. It could be that I was in the dream fatter or skinnier or with different hair, or there'll be some difference about me if it's me that makes it metaphorical. If I'm in the dream, but I look exactly like Dan, then normally I'm a metaphor for something else. So it could be that, uh, say you had a dream tonight and I've been talking as a therapist here, so to speak, as someone might interpret it in their head, rather than Dan the YouTuber, they might be thinking, "Oh, Dan's being a therapist now." So if someone's got that kind of idea of me, and then maybe there's some issue related to your therapist, I might be in the dream taking the role as a metaphor for the therapist that you're actually dreaming about. Or it could be that there's some issue and I take the role of being the therapist because that's how your brain decides to help you to look at that issue in some way. But then it means it's not about me specifically. I'm just being used as part of a metaphor. So all dreams kind of, I contributed to a book. I'm trying to look up on my shelf and see what it's called. Why We Dream. There's a book called Why We Dream, and I contributed to that, about some of the dreams that have been presented to me and what the reality was of what was going on in the lives of the people when they presented the dream, that were very evident from just the dream. The dream revealed everything. I also, in my Psychology of Big Brother book, which I wrote years and years ago, I based some examples on the UK Big Brother, and used examples from the Celebrity Big Brother because I thought people will know the celebrities better than if I used random people who are in the normal Big Brother. And I talked about sort of dream interpretation there and how you can get an idea of, um, here in the UK, what they used to do was Big Brother in the old days used to be streamed on the internet, live. So I think there was like a 10-minute delay so that they could silence out, and they used to put bird sound or whatever over bits that they didn't want people at home to hear. So if they talked about something confidential, or if they swore or anything like that, they would silence that out with bird sound. But you could sit at home, very sad. You could sit at home watching Big Brother pretty much 24 hours a day. So you could watch, say, a day's footage, and you could sort of take notes on what's been going on, and you could take notes on things like the way someone has stood and sort of the context of what you see going on. And then you would end up having days where they would the next day say, "Oh, I had the most crazy dreams last night. I dreamt about," and then they would describe these wild dreams. Back to my meditations, part of what I try to make them is kind of a bit unusual, partly because that's how dreams present. Normally, there's a certain dream logic that makes sense when you're dreaming and you don't question it. But if you ever looked at it in reality, you'd think that's not even possible. You can't walk through that door and be in that house over there when that's supposed to be the bathroom, or So that's just sort of an aside because it suddenly came to my head. But yeah, so the Big Brother people would talk about a dream, for example, and if you've been watching the live feed, you'd be able to think, so yesterday when you were stood there and those two were talking about that, and your face looked like you really wanted to butt in and say something, but you chose not to. The fact you chose not to, this is what that dream was about, because this is what you're describing sounds like a metaphor for that incident that happened, except that your metaphor now has a resolution. And so that's kind of how it works. And obviously, again, a large part of my way of working is based on that kind of idea that everything, our brains work metaphorically. Um, Kind of, we work looking at patterns and finding the patterns in things and creating these metaphors, and we use metaphors for our language and everything like that. So I just try and use all that obviously in the stories. Just having a look. I feel like I'm miles away from the bottom as I'm reading down. It's good to see people having a bit of a chat over here at the side. Yeah, it's very common. Emotions, obviously, because they involve chemicals kind of going through your body and what have you. Emotions take a while to die down. So if you wake up, say the alarm goes off just when you've had a dream, um, or just after even you've had a dream, there's a chance that you'll still feel the emotions from that dream. It's the same reason why when you work in children's homes, you're always told, don't try and I always teach parents when I've done parenting work, don't try and address the issue as soon as you've calmed things down. Because internally, in that, say, child or whatever who was really angry, they're still physiologically really angry. So they may have calmed down psychologically, but their body is still flooded as if it's in fight or flight mode. And so it's very, very easy for the next, say, 4 hours or something to accidentally re trigger that by flicking the psychology almost back onto the topic of fight or flight. So what you do is you address it either much later that day or the next morning. You kind of sit down at a calm time when you know that they don't have, they've not been stressed or whatever it happens to be, or anxious or anything in, say, the period of time in the run up to your conversation, and then you have the conversation then, because then the conversation is at a time when they're not likely to instantly get triggered by something in the conversation. Let's have a look. Yeah, troll hating cat. Yeah, sleep talking. Obviously, some people it just comes and goes. Others have it quite a lot, I think. Um, the idea of dreams is generally to forget them. So there are things you can do to remember dreams, like once you wake up, try to wake up when you're dreaming for a start. So try to set an alarm just slightly before the time that you would naturally wake up, so that hopefully the alarm goes off when you're dreaming, and then have like a pad next to you so you can instantly write everything down, even if it's just words, to give yourself pointers, because your brain is naturally wired to attempt to forget what you've been dreaming about. And so writing it down gives you prompts. It's a bit like if I'm, say, doing a meditation or anything like that, there's a few things that come into it, but one of them is state dependent memory, learning, and behavior, um, which people can go and research if they want. And so, for example, it's easier to remember the stuff you got up to when you were last drunk when you're drunk. because the brain has kind of encoded those memories with that state, as well as with sort of just in the brain, kind of in a pattern of neuronal firing. And the same when you're hypnotized, or you're meditating, or you're dreaming, or anything like that. When you're kind of in that state, it's a very different state to when you're walking along and you're focusing externally and you're doing something else. And so, for example, it's very common that I'll say to someone, you can open your eyes in your own time, or what have you. They'll open their eyes and they won't remember, unless prompted, hardly anything about what just went on. And I won't have told them to forget anything. They just don't remember it because I didn't tell them to try and remember it. I didn't tell them to try and make connections to anything. So they'll remember little bits of it, but the more time that goes, so I normally, say in a therapy session, will say you can open your eyes once all the changes are made, or something like that. I sit quietly and wait. And over the next few minutes, they then gradually reorientate and they open their eyes. And as soon as they open their eyes, I start talking about something completely different, something maybe I was talking about before. So I might say something about the weather, and maybe I was talking about the weather before they, when they first came in. So I'll talk about the weather or something, and I'll keep that conversation going, talking quite fast paced at them, not giving them a chance to focus their mind on what we've just been doing, so that hopefully they don't undo anything. They don't sort of try and pick holes in things and think, what was it he said again? Because I wanted to just ask him about this, or I wanted to ask him about that. I don't want them to pick holes in things. So I keep their attention focused elsewhere. And that goes the same with dreams, that if you wake up and the dream's kind of there, as soon as you start focusing on other things that are not the dream, you'll start forgetting it. And so to remember it, you need to be taking advantage of focusing just on the dream, and maybe writing bits down while it's in your mind, and even going over it and telling it as if there's no one around you, just tell it as if you're telling a friend about that dream, so that you're then kind of now moving it from this vague thing in your head to a story that you've told. And that makes it a bit more memorable, because then you might remember that you told the story. So you don't remember the dream itself necessarily, but you now remember your telling of the dream. Let's have a look. What it means when you have the strong emotions when you dream is that that wasn't resolved during the day. So it's not so much about not addressing it; it's that it wasn't resolved. So, for example, if I don't know, if someone, say your manager, came and had a go at you and told you off for something and made you feel really bad, but you didn't feel that was justified. And so you're thinking in your head how angry you are with your manager for what they've said, but you think, I can't tell you I'm angry because I might lose my job. So you haven't expressed that, which means that then when it gets to bedtime, you dream that anger, but that anger isn't just anger that you can control, that felt like annoyance or whatever in that moment. It comes out a lot worse in the dream. It comes out as being far more intense in the dream. So it's not so much that it wasn't addressed as such, it's more that it just didn't get resolved. And so your brain is saying, so we need to resolve the anger from that incident. So we'll create a story or a metaphor of some kind that has that resolved. The same with anxiety. If you spend the day thinking, oh, they're going to be so annoyed with me because I didn't return this item that I said I was going to bring back to them today, but I never got round to it, and they're going to be so angry. They're never going to want to see me again. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll just never see them ever again. And you do all this, and nothing gets resolved. You've done the worrying, and then you get on with your life. And because it wasn't resolved, you then end up having that kind of emotion and that stuff come out in the dream with a resolution, ideally, a sort of a closing pattern stage, like the example I gave of, you're annoyed with someone, and so you kick a football in the dream, because kicking the football lets out that annoyance, that sort of anger or whatever. Let's have a look. Books. Yeah, I've got some books around me. To remember it without having to write it down, obviously, as I say, one thing is to tell it as if you're telling a friend or something, but do that as before you've forgotten it. Um, that's the same with like remembering names. When people introduce themselves to you, one of the suggestions for remembering names is that you say the person's name over and over again back to them as you next, for the few minutes you're talking with them, so that you then have said their name, and because you've said it, that then becomes more memorable. Yeah, the first lot of Big Brother I liked because I like psychology and social science and stuff like that. So Big Brother back in the day was originally kind of like a social experiment. You got to watch 24 hours a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, footage of a bunch of people who are very different interacting with each other in an enclosed environment, having to work things out. You could see who liked who, um, how they interacted, how they resolved conflict. Um, you could read their, you could take as much time as you wanted to read their body language, to kind of work out and predict what was going to happen in the future based on what you're seeing here and now. So, from as a learning tool, I used to find it brilliant. You could watch things like, oh, whenever this person talks to that person, they always stand behind a counter, or they always happen to just naturally walk behind a chair. So they always keep something between them and the other person. And so you would learn these sort of things, and you'd think, so they seem to be getting on perfectly fine, but is that a sign? So you'd make a hypothesis, and you think, is that a sign that maybe there's some problem in that relationship there that that person has, who keeps moving behind objects with the other person? What's going on there? And you try and work out what might happen in the future based on your observations in the present, which I think every therapist, obviously, you do that as a therapist. I like to think every therapist does that in coffee shops and in parks, and whenever you watch any live reality TV, um, the more normal, if there is such a thing nowadays, the better. I like to think most people do that anyway, but it just means that you get a sense of being able to observe as much as you can and continue your practice and your professional development. Um, So that was why I used to watch it a lot, and that was why I wrote about it, because I was commenting in Big Brother blogs a lot, sharing my observations, and people kept saying, "Oh, you should write all this down. We'd love a book about all this." And so I wrote it all down, and no one wanted a book about it, um, but I wrote it still. Let's have a look. I've talked quite a lot about what got me into hypnosis and meditation, but it was the fact that it transformed my life. Meditation, I was doing meditation before I knew what meditation was. I was doing it from being a primary school child, didn't know it was meditation. The same with hypnosis. I was doing hypnosis as a primary school child, and I didn't even know it was hypnosis. Um, to be able to control my senses, I would go into the woods, because I grew up in an area that's got a lot of woodland. I used to go into the woods, sit in a tree, close my eyes, and focus all of my attention on trying to hear, say, one bird singing. And I'd try and pinpoint in space exactly where that bird is. And I'd have a sense of that external reality being inside my head, but externally. I don't know if that makes sense. But so it would be the same location, but it would be as if I have spread out to fill everything I can sense. And so I would then try and pinpoint exactly where that one bird was. And so I was learning, and I was just doing this because I wanted to. Everything's overwhelming. There's just constant barrage of noise and different frequencies and things coming at your ears. There's constant, incredibly bright and flashing and moving stuff coming into your eyes. Um, Incredibly intense feelings, like clothing and seats and things. And so you'd want to somehow narrow all that down to make everything peaceful. And so I just instinctively used to go into the woods and focus on like one bird, or one sound, trying to pinpoint one set of, say, leaves or a branch moving or something, and try and pinpoint one exact location of sound and hold my attention on that, and avoid and try and ignore everything else that's going on around me. So that kind of got me into meditation without me knowing that I was learning to do meditation. And then for hypnosis, I Paul McKenna did a documentary in like 1993, about hypnosis. And as part of that documentary, he demonstrated, or he didn't, someone else demonstrated doing hypnosis. And he said, um, this is what the hypnotist is looking for. And he described what the hypnotist was looking for that let them know what to do to hypnotize that individual, and that that individual was being hypnotized. And I didn't know that people had facial expressions, that what went on that you could look at or hear had a bearing on what was going on internally for people. So all of a sudden, that one documentary transformed my life. I suddenly realized that there are different mouth movements, different eye movements, different muscle movements that mean something else. So I used to, as I said yesterday, I used to stand in front of the mirror for hours and hours and hours practicing moving my ears back so that I could be moving the muscles that you need to move to create a real, allegedly a real smile, so that I'd be able to smile at people, making it look like I'm genuinely smiling, even though I've got no idea what they want me to smile for. It just feels like I'm supposed to be smiling, so here's a smile. Um, but it was from learning, it was from hypnosis, and learning that this is all taught when you learn hypnosis, and not taught anywhere else. It's not taught in school how to read faces and things like that. So hypnosis got me into learning all of that stuff. I also, prior to the documentary, I had an interest in hypnosis, hence watching the documentary, because Paul McKenna had his stage show on TV. And it looks like you walk up to someone, click your fingers, the person kind of zonks out, and then you tell them, I want you to do X, and then you click your fingers and they go and do it. And so I thought that would be incredibly helpful in school. If I could do that and just be able to walk up to other students, walk up to the teachers, click my fingers, tell them exactly as I want my world to be, and then they'll make my world how I want it, that would be really handy. So I thought maybe that's what I would be learning. And then Paul McKenna did this documentary, and that totally transformed my perspective on what hypnosis was. And then as I started learning about hypnosis, I realized that it's kind of an illusion, this whole I have magical control over you kind of thing. Um, but that was why, obviously, selfishly, I first got interested, was the idea that I could click my fingers and make my teachers and fellow students do exactly as I want, and then have an easy life where everything is regimented and structured and planned, and everything goes like clockwork, and I know what's happening when and how everything's going to run. Um, Unfortunately, hypnosis doesn't work like that. But since then, I then learned that hypnosis is the subject where you learn about body language, facial expressions, um, essentially advanced communication skills. That's how I would describe what, if you go and learn hypnosis, what you're learning is just advanced communication skills that have value in whatever context you want to learn them in. Um, I'm far less patient with people nowadays than I was when I was much younger. I used to be very, very, very patient with people. Nowadays, I just sort of think, why should I make out that I'm, why should I kind of hold off? I don't know what the right word is to explain it, but why should I don't know, let a situation keep going on when I could just say what's in my head, um, and that people should obviously accept me for who I am. And so if I say something, that's just what happens. Yeah, Nicola, glad you've caught me live too. Yeah, Sam, it sounds like you've had a lot that you've been going through. Just trying to read down. Yeah, the thing about meditation, you sort of mention about finding it hard to concentrate enough to be able to meditate, is that how people often seem to portray it is, and I talked about this yesterday a bit, is this very rigid kind of you must relax and you must focus on this, that, and the other. Um, Really, it's finding what works for you. So, if trying to concentrate on one thing for an extended period of time obviously isn't going to work for you, then it's about how can you concentrate, say, uh, this probably isn't I can't think of the right term, but I'll explain a bit in a minute. Say on a journey. So I'm not saying journey as in an actual journey, but one idea. Um, it says my connection is unstable. So if it flickers or anything, that might be at my end. So yes, you're not trying to focus necessarily on one specific idea. So as I yesterday gave the description with the ADHD guy about how what worked for him was never to mention relaxation or anything like that, but I had him focusing on what the experience was of dragging a mountain bike up a hill, and then what the experience was of bombing that mountain bike down the other side of a hill, and was just jumping his attention around to lots of different things, so that what his concentration was on the experience, not on a single aspect of an experience. So it wasn't like, because obviously it's really hard if someone says sit there and just focus on your breathing. If there's no one guiding you to try and hold your attention and acknowledge that you're doing the right thing or anything like that, it's very hard to just choose off your own back. Today I'm just going to sit in this chair, I'm going to close my eyes and focus on my breathing for the next 15 minutes. I would say that until you get quite experienced, most people end up giving up quite quickly. They sort of, it feels like more time has passed than has really passed. You think, oh, I've been doing this so long. And you start focusing on your thoughts now rather than on your breathing. And then you end up thinking, I'll just open my eyes now. It must be time now. And then you think, oh, 2 minutes have gone past. Um, so yeah, so it's more about finding your way rather than doing it someone else's way. And obviously that's, again, that's why I try and make such varied kinds of things, so that everyone has a chance to do it, uh, find what works for them, and just find, I don't expect anyone to like every single thing that I do. Um, but I like to think that hopefully something among what I do, people think, oh yeah, I resonate with that, and then they find that one approach that they can stick to and learn and master, that works for them. Because obviously my stories don't have to be used just at night time. They work better therapeutically when you listen to them if you're not going to fall asleep to them than they do if you listen to them when you are going to fall asleep to them. Um, and likewise, the issue of silence, that can be a difficult one. But again, it's sometimes if someone doesn't have silence, then it's about how to learn to incorporate the whatever sounds you can hear. Um, but it is a very individual thing, I think. I'm just trying to read and talk at the same time. There are lots of places to go and learn hypnosis. Obviously, my recommendation is to find out whatever country you're in, find out the rules for that country, about kind of requirements that you need to meet for whatever it is you plan on doing with the hypnosis. So, if someone was going to learn it for stage hypnosis, then what are the requirements where you live for people to be able to do stage hypnosis, and then what are the courses that meet those requirements, and not just the minimum. So, for example, in the UK, literally, you can just say, tomorrow, I am going to be a hypnotherapist. That's all you have to do to be a hypnotherapist in the UK. You don't have to have a qualification. You don't have to, there's no requirement, no like legal requirement to have anything other than just deciding tomorrow you're a hypnotherapist. Um, but the government has had um, an organisation that's linked to the government here in the UK, sort of loosely, that then sets the here are the kind of educational standards. Here's the standards of what we think someone who is a practitioner should meet if they're to be a practitioner. And so all the main UK hypnotherapy governing bodies have made sure that they will only accept members at practitioner level who meet what the government essentially say this is what we think everyone should have. So it's just guidance, but they meet that guidance, and they won't let someone join them unless you meet that guidance. And it's still quite low guidance, quite low standards, but at least it's something. So my view would be to find find courses that meet quite a high level of standard. If you were going to use it, say, for therapy, then I would expect the course to be at least a year or so long. I'd expect it to be perhaps 450 hours of education as a minimum. I'd expect it to be very practical, face to face with a tutor. I'd expect it to involve lots of client session work. And if it didn't include all of that, for example, I know courses that will give you a certificate that says you're a practitioner that you can do in like a day. And yet I would never want to go and put my mental health in the hands of someone whose only training around working with people with mental health problems was a one-day training course. And before that, they were, say, a computer programmer for 30 years or something. There are some people who maybe take a one-day hypnosis training course because they're already a fully qualified counselor or a fully qualified cognitive behavioral therapist or a fully qualified whatever it happens to be, and they just want that extra bit of skill to add to the therapy they already do. But aside from that, if this is what you're going to be learning as your sole form of learning, then I wouldn't kind of be happy going to someone who didn't have a good year or more of training for their main training course they've done, and then obviously hope that they keep up regular continued professional development. But Google is easy to find things in your country. Just reading down. Sitting in the washing basket watching the washing machine spin. It's better than sitting in the washing machine and watching the basket spin. Let's have a look. Just reading down. I'm aware that I shut up when I'm reading. Woohoo, I've made it to the bottom of the live chat list, finally. Yeah, I also obviously grew up where the first half of my life was largely technology free. And then the second half of my life is with the technology revolution, so to speak. And the more technology there is, the more technology there is, the more I find myself getting really, really stressed. It's very, very stressful dealing with technology. Partly, obviously, because of the fact that technology ends up being because there are people trying to plant viruses on people's computers to steal stuff, and there's all this sort of stuff going on that means that whenever you go to your computer, unlike the first generation of all these kind of devices where you turned the item on and then you used it, now you turn the item on, it runs slow for an hour, and then it tells you that it's just been downloading a whole bunch of updates that you didn't know it was going to download, and that it's now going to turn off in 5 seconds. And there's no button for you to press to cancel that, or you've just walked away from your computer for 10 seconds, and in that 10 seconds, the 5 seconds passed, and your computer is shut down in the middle of you doing some work when you're already stressed because it was running slow while you're trying to do the work. So all of a sudden, purely because technology is constantly having to try and do updates for everything rather than it was working fine, can't we just leave it alone? Um, Technology ends up being so stressful to use. I'm sure that there'll be a point at some point in the future when updates and things will happen. So you completely are unaware that it's happened. The device just always seems to work. And there'll be a generation at some point that says, how did you even cope? A bit like people with broadband versus dial up. You know, how did you even cope with it being that slow? Yeah, I have tons of technology, but I find that it makes me incredibly angry nearly all the time. Um, and it's because of the fact that none of it works how it's supposed to work as far as I want it to. And things like, yep, you can kind of have semi control over setting updates to run at certain times. But the reality is that I end up needing to do things at certain times. So if I'm, say, writing a book, I'm halfway down a certain page, I've got multiple notes open on different documents on the computer. I've got lots of documents, lots of tabs open, say on Google and things like that. And it needs to all be open until I've completed writing that book. And because the computer will totally 100% shut down and reboot, that then means that I have to try and go and find things from all over the computer that aren't just automatically, they're not in places where it's easy to say, I can just put them all in one folder or just reopen everything from that folder again. They're all in different places, all kind of needing to be in one place on my screen. And I then have to try and re-find every single thing. And yeah, I just find it really, really stressful. Or I'll be processing a video or something, and that video is going to take slightly longer to process than I expect. And then the computer does an automatic update because my computer's on at, say, 1 a.m. and the video hasn't quite processed in time or something, and I didn't know it was going to do it. So it's so yeah, so it's something that I think that in the future, in maybe 20 or 30 years time, it'll be at a place where I would think this technology works how it works in my head, whereas in reality it almost never works. At least my experience is it almost never works how I want it to and how I imagine it should. um, but yeah, so like now I've got and it's computers, like for example the laptop I'm using now um, automatically does things when it's in sleep mode. And so I take this laptop out, I have it in sleep mode because I'm working on it. It's fully charged, and an hour later, and it's only a new thing, so it's some update that's happened in the last 6 months or something. Um, an hour later, it'll have no battery and it'll be scalding hot, and it will have done stuff and overridden me having it in sleep mode. So things like that then irritate me because I then open it to use it and I don't have a charger on me because I'm out in the middle of nowhere, like going into a cafe or something where I can't charge it, and I then can't use it. So yeah, so I kind of I like the idea of technology. I just don't think that it's currently implemented as well as I would like. So fortunately, I've made it to the bottom of the list of things now, so I'm able to read what's coming up at the bottom. And yeah, someone had mentioned what it was that was this Patrick Stewart thing. That was him earlier on. I'm sure I read that comment somewhere. And yesterday, again, someone had mentioned it was that which has little magnetic pieces in. Not that you can probably see it. That's fun. Cat in a box. What am I reading? I'm very comfortable with understanding it all. I just don't like the lack of it not doing what I want. I do have a Newton's cradle. I saw something. Whose signature? Patrick Stewart's. Yeah, I got Patrick Stewart's signature. I went and saw Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen do. I can't remember which play it was. I think I've got it up on my shelf next to me. Is that it? Yeah, I went to see them in No Man's Land. And bear with. Now, where do they crop up in here? Given they're the two main cast. It was incredibly hot in there. It was the height of summer. Somewhere on there. So yeah, so I obviously got to meet them for that. I have lots of random stuff just in reach. But yeah, I've got Newton's cradle sitting up on the shelf over there. Yeah, I probably don't need problem solving or coaching. Just could do with it actually not overruling my decisions and my way of living my life. I don't necessarily have a favorite music. I like Elvis Presley. I like Katie Melua, Russell Watson. Things that most people I don't think are necessarily huge fans of. Who else? Meatloaf, Michael Jackson, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses. I like things that make me feel something or move me in some way, like physically make me move. Yeah, it's the wrong one. I was thinking of Waiting for Godot, but I was sure that that was the wrong one. I don't know. I don't think I do anything interesting in everyday life with covert hypnosis. I have made managers fall asleep in meetings. I suppose that might be something that people might find interesting. Myself and a work colleague, we used to have competitions to see who could send the most other work colleagues, including the managers, to sleep by the end of the business meetings, or not the business meeting. We used to have these meetings where you would sit in silence, and if working in children's homes. So we had one meeting that was a business meeting, and one meeting that was a meeting where you were expected to any issues you had with any of your colleagues or the managers or anything. And obviously, what would happen is you're sat in a room with all of your work colleagues and your managers, and everyone would just sit there in silence for an hour instead of saying, well, so and so really annoys me when they do this or whatever. And so myself and a colleague would see who could hypnotize the most people or make the most people in that room fall asleep before the end of the meeting. So that was something. Um, while practicing doing the same on a train up to London once, I did the same to a mother and daughter who was sat opposite me. Um, and I was actually reading a book with I've got it on my shelf somewhere, by Milton Erickson, with hypnotherapy written down the spine. And for some reason, they never twigged that I was the cause of them constantly falling asleep. Um, so yeah, so I've done things like that. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've done anything particularly interesting. Um, just practicey things that you do when you're practicing. Yeah, piano guys. I like piano guys as well. My brother and a hot drink. Oh yeah, I totally forgot. Yeah, my brother um, found that he was incredibly creative when he was stoned, and found that uh, wasn't he wished that he wasn't very motivated, and he wished that he could have that level of creativity when he was in work. So I made it so that he could get stoned from drinking cups of tea, so that he could then go into meetings, sit in the meeting, drink a cup of tea, and how he makes the tea would change the quality of his being stoned kind of experience. So he could then control what kind of being stoned experience he'd want. And so he would sit in staff meetings and meetings with his manager and what have you. And they would sort of say, "Oh, you're going to come up with ideas and talk about the different issues the company's having or whatever." And he would just go get a cup of tea first, and he'd have his cup of tea, get really creative, and he ended up getting a promotion for how creative he was and all the ideas that he kept coming up with. So yeah, so that was that. But again, that's just normal kind of. He had a problem he wanted therapy for, essentially. That's kind of how my brain sees it. He thought, I'd like to be able to be creative in work. I'm creative in this area of my life. Can we replicate that and transfer it over without having to actually get really stoned? So that was just simple anchoring, just linking it so that um, the experience of being uh, stoned was linked to the experience of drinking the drink. Yeah, he probably knows more stories than I can recall off the top of my head. Yeah, I noticed. See, I think I mentioned that I was doing hypnosis in primary school without even realizing I was doing it. An example of this, and I sort of retrospectively thought, oh, I've been doing that for years. Was you'd go into the playground, and I'm an August child, so I was one of the youngest in the class, um, and I was very small as well as a child, and so no one ever paid attention to me. No one listened to what I had to say, but I've always had good ideas. Not every idea I have is good, but I've always had good ideas, if that makes sense. So right back as a small child, I would have good ideas. Probably said that right. Um, and so I would come up with ideas like the people would say, "What are we going to all play?" And so I'd come up with ideas of what I think we should play. No one would pay attention to me. No one would listen. I would just be completely ignored. But if it was a good idea, the child next to me, their ears are open, so they would hear it. Eventually, they would start suggesting it. When people are throwing suggestions out, they would start suggesting it. But the child the other side of me also has their ears open, so they also heard it. So if it's a good idea and they like it, even if they weren't consciously paying attention, they would then come up with the same idea, and gradually it would ripple among everyone until the big kids who do make the decisions say the idea. And then everyone says, oh, so and so has come up with this idea, we're doing that. And so we would end up frequently doing things I wanted to do, but I wouldn't get the credit for it. So I would have first been the first one to mention the idea, but I wouldn't get credit for it. And I never used to care. I used to just think, well, as long as I'm doing what I want to do, I don't care who gets the credit for it. We're doing what I want. That's the whole point of wanting to do something. But I would see this happen to other kids. I'd be, when I'm not sort of having to join in, I'd be sitting back and I'd see it happen to other children, and I'd see them throw a strop. I'd see them storm off and cross their arms and go and sit in a corner. Go, oh, I came up with that idea. It wasn't their idea. And I'd be thinking, but you wanted to do it. Why aren't you just joining in and doing what you wanted to do? Why? Who cares who gets the credit for the idea? And it was only later that I realized that obviously that's a large part of what you do with conversational, covert kind of hypnosis, is that you're putting ideas out there. And if they're good ideas for the person, then the person picks up on it, even if they don't realize you've really said it. And it sinks in, and then they come up with the idea themselves. Then they'll tell you, I've just had this idea. And so the client ends up constantly taking the credit for their own therapy because they think, I came up with this idea, I've decided to do this, and they don't give you any credit as a therapist. And that's obviously what one of the ultimate goals is in therapy, is to try and make it so that the client is always empowered and feels that they're the ones in control of what's happening to them and that they come up with their own decisions. So yeah, so that was like when I was 7, 8 years old. I sort of noticed that this was going on and would use that. And being autistic and struggling with uh, sort of talking to people and doing certain tasks, I would find that if you do a really boring task that someone else doesn't like doing, so again in primary school, say someone was going to have to talk to the teacher about something and ask the teacher for something, I would say, oh, if you want, I'll do that. And I'll talk about, say, some really boring task that the child I'm paired up with really, really hates the idea of doing. And I'll offer to do that so that they then end up going and doing the thing that I really hate doing, which is talking to the teacher and asking for whatever it was that we have to ask for. So again, you would learn to influence situations like that. Like when I was in work, I used to work in a holiday camp. I would offer to go and work in the pot wash and scrub pots and pans and shove stuff through the machine and stuff like that. And people would be thinking, great, I'm more than happy to go on the tills and to go and serve customers if you'll just go and do that. A bit like the whole Brer Rabbit thing of, whatever you do, don't throw me in the briar patch. I would be the one that thinks, yeah, throw me in the briar patch. So there's other bits I think are actually far worse. So everyone else doesn't. So people think the thing that they think is bad is actually the thing that I think is good and that I'd rather do. And so I would then offer to do it as a way of making them do the thing that they think is the good thing, which I actually think is the bad thing, if that makes sense. So right through my sort of life before I really learned about hypnosis properly and fully, I was doing a lot of these kind of strategies just as a way of getting through life and kind of getting my own way in situations. You'd find the thing you don't want to do, and then you'd find the thing no one else wants to do, and you'd offer to do the thing no one else wants to do. Or you'd suggest something and then just keep quiet. And if it's a good idea, you'd let it ripple out, and then everyone will end up normally doing your idea. And you just have to not care whether you get credit for things or not. Maybe we need to. I'm trying to read where I started reading a sentence and it jumped. Yeah, you just need tea. Um, I don't know Company of Heroes, not off the top of my head, at least. Yeah, Boston Tea Party takes on a new meaning now. When they come over and say, "Would you like another pot?" Um, I don't know, Adolf? It's not so much about things. So this is the PGO spike induction trance out subject without their permission. It's not quite the way to kind of think about it. It's more a case of if, for example, someone hears a loud noise or something, that's going to trigger a PGO spike. Is going to make trigger that orientation response as they pay attention to whatever the stimulus was. And if it sort of opens them up just in that moment to want some solution, some kind of what was that, what's going to resolve this bit of uncertainty, this moment of uncertainty. So, for example, say I walked up to someone in the street and suddenly just, I don't know, shook hands with them and did a handshake type of induction on them in the street. There's a very high chance that they would start off going along with it because they're confused, they've been surprised, they don't know what to expect, they don't know what's happening. There's that few seconds where they're in that state, and so they're following along because they're in that state. But because obviously you can't just hypnotize people like that in reality, only in films or where it's been pre-set up, um, or someone has to really, really believe that they have no choice as an individual, and the chances of randomly finding that person. So you can't just walk up to a person and randomly they're going to be that person. um, what would normally happen is they would snap out of it. So unless they were suddenly comfortable with it, if they were comfortable with it and they thought, actually, I'm comfortable, I'm going to go with this experience, then they might go with it. But if they're not comfortable with it, they'll just snap out of it. They'll sort of think, what are you doing? What are you doing to me? And they'll jump back out of that state. So technically you started it without their permission, but it's not like, because like a horror film could do the same without your permission. There could be a jump scare in a horror film that you're watching the horror film because you think it's, say, a gory horror and you're okay with gore, but you absolutely hate, say, what you might think of as maybe more psychological horrors, or I don't know, I'm thinking of something like Paranormal Activity, something that has a lot of jump scares in. You might hate that kind of thing, but be perfectly okay with, say, a gory horror where there's nothing, no real jump scares. Say it's a brand of horror films doesn't really do jump scares, it just does lots of gore. And then all of a sudden they do a jump scare in it. And again, you're then suddenly freaked out by this and it has influenced you. It's done that without your permission. You didn't decide to get freaked out. You didn't want that to happen. It's just suddenly happened in that moment. And then you decide, do you carry on watching the film? Do you then think, nope, I'm not watching this anymore, and just turn it off? What are your actions after that? So it's that kind of experience. I have not read Mein Kampf. I have contributed to a book about Hitler. I contributed to Dr. David Lewis's book about how Hitler was hypnotized after being in the uh, I think it's through the First World War, and being gassed and going blind, and then he had hysterical blindness, but he 100% didn't believe it could be possible for him to have hysterical blindness, and so he was hypnotized by a psychiatrist to cure the hysterical blindness. But the documents about the methods that person used kind of had some uh, indirect impact. So I contributed to a book relating to Hitler and to stuff about um, controlling people and how the masses get controlled, sort of how people can be influenced. Perfectly good, ordinary people can be influenced to do things that, um, under ordinary circumstances, you would see as immoral or whatever. Um, yeah, I'm not an introvert, but I'm not a people person particularly. And I'm definitely not a people person who follows some company line about customers always being right or anything like that. Um, no, just normal South Coast I live on. Have always lived down on the South Coast, kind of. Well, I live in Chichester, but have lived in kind of Bognor, Arundel, Chichester area all my life. My dad comes from Wales area, so but there's never been any hint of a Welsh accent in my family, in my immediate family. What you often find, for example, there's lots of stuff that was on um, Darren Brown, like where someone would answer a ringing phone and then they would just kind of collapse onto the floor, or he would walk up to someone in the street and do something and they would stick to the spot or whatever. And it was always someone who they had previously already worked with off camera. And so they weren't a completely kind of spontaneous person. It wasn't like just a random, they made it look on film, or they would make it look on film like a random, you've walked up to this person, but actually the person's been pre-hypnotized and has been already given suggestions about uh, what to do, how to respond, or whatever. Um, I've seen it done by other hypnotists where they um, have introduced themselves, say, to a group of people, like on street hypnosis things, and they've introduced themselves to a group. And then at some point, they approach someone from that group, but it may look like they've approached them randomly on their own. And when you see that, it looks like they've worked with them before. So I've seen people do it where they've worked with the person before, and then uh, that person ends up the next year, say at a conference or something, the next year they're there again. And because they've been worked with before, they're very easy to just walk up to and do something to, which to bystander bystanders can look like you've just randomly walked up to a stranger and done something, when actually you haven't. You've walked up to somebody who knows who you are. So I have no problem with magic and magicians. Um, I like Darren Brown. I've got tons of Darren Brown stuff beside me here. I've been to every single one of his shows, some of them more than once since they began. I have a magic wand in the front room in front of my TV. I've got a magic top hat in a cupboard. Um, so yeah, my uncle was a magician, and I've got all his magic stuff after he died, because that was my obsession from childhood onwards, was what is in your magic suitcases. I would sleep around my nan and granddad's, and he would turn up after doing magic shows, and he would place two suitcases down on the ground, locked, full of all his magic stuff. And all I wanted to do was open the suitcases and get the magic stuff and go through it all and find out how he did everything he did. And so when he died, I was instantly kind of, if no one else wants all the magic stuff, I'm happy to have it. And no one else wanted the magic stuff, so I had it all. Sounds like you're turning into Britney Spears. Um, the kind of wand I have is a magic one. Yeah, I'd probably, to do my whole house as a show and tell, it would be very messy. Um, I'd probably have to do this on my mobile phone. I've grown a moustache once, but that was to go to Goodwood Revival. Um, Hypnosis isn't a therapy. So, in regards to using hypnosis to quit smoking, hypnosis itself isn't a therapy. It's something that you use with therapy to help therapy to be a bit more effective. So, for example, with cognitive behavioral therapy, if you do cognitive behavioral therapy with hypnosis, it's 30% more effective than if you do cognitive behavioral therapy without hypnosis. So hypnosis itself isn't a therapy. So it's a question of what was the therapy they were doing that failed. What was it addressing? So when I work with people, I look at problems as being the person's solution. I don't look at most problems as being a problem. So smoking isn't a problem, it's a solution for a problem. And the question is, what's it a solution for? And how else do you can you address that problem? So say you were smoking. Oh yeah, I've got a rubber chicken as well. Um, uh, so say you are smoking to socialize, you need a different way of approaching being treated than if you smoke to try and manage stress. And then you'll need a different way of being treated to if you smoke, say, to deal with boredom. And so you'd look at, and likewise, you need a different way of being treated to if you smoke purely out of habits. So, for example, the phone rings, you answer the phone, and you instinctively have a cigarette because that is the pattern. I have a cigarette when I'm on the phone, kind of thing. Um, or you wake up and you always have, say, a coffee and a cigarette. So all these things require different ways of treating them. So it would come down to what was the way the therapist was using. Just hypnotizing someone and suggesting smoking away almost never works. It can work short term sometimes, especially if you do like a version. There's someone I know who a good friend of mine, he said, hypnotize him and just make the smoking go away. Just tell him, this is, I was probably about 22 or 23 or whatever at the time. Um, he said, just hypnotize me and tell me that it's disgusting, it's horrible, it's like tar pouring down my throat. Make it so it's so horrible I won't want to do it again. So I did that. And a few weeks later, he said, I've been sick loads of times. I've really struggled, but I've managed it. I've forced myself to smoke again. You failed. You didn't manage to get your hypnosis to work on me. And in my head, I was just thinking, whoopee, that was really helpful of yourself to yourself. Um, but but that, even if he hadn't done that, the chances are it would have ended up failing at some point because the reasons for him smoking wouldn't have been addressed. I didn't address them at all. I literally was just telling him smoking is disgusting. It's like tar pouring down your throat. I was just telling him these sort of things within hypnosis. Um, there was no therapy going on. And the research on it is that hypnosis, literally just suggesting the problem away, only works something like 20% of the time or less. So it's not a particularly successful thing. Normally, there are things you can do to make it more successful, like tell the person, I want you to not smoke for at least 24 hours before you come into your therapy session. I want you to scrub your house clean, get rid of all ashtrays, get rid of all cigarettes, make it so that as far as you'd be concerned, no smoker lives in your household. And then when you come into the therapy session, that's what you're coming in like. By then, they've shown all that motivation. They've shown a desire to definitely stay stopped. They've changed their habits for that, for already for 24 hours. And they don't have an environment with all the same triggers anymore. So there are things you can do to increase just literally telling someone to stop and making it work. But it's, it's not. I'm just suddenly reading that apparently it's not a common phrase to say you've got a magic wand in the front room. Isn't that where everyone keeps their magic wands? So it's wooden, black and white, um, and kind of magic wand sized. Yeah, I haven't watched all the Harry Potter films yet. I think I've seen a bit of some of them and possibly all of the first one. So I've no idea what happens in Harry Potter, but I'm sure that they do need their magic wands on them. Just trying to read down. Yes, Ellen, that's a question I just suddenly thought. Oh yeah, I've never asked that. Yeah, I feel the same sometimes. If I get called Daniel, it's normally because someone's telling me off or something, or someone's trying to have some authority over me in some way. So, for example, say I always sign off emails and things with Dan, and in my email thing, if people read my email name when they receive who the email was from, it will say Dan, and then they'll go and call me Daniel, even though I've not mentioned the word Daniel anywhere. I always feel like it's them attempting to keep a one-up kind of position on me, like when you're dealing with certain professionals and they're doing that. Um, so normally I just get called Dan, but I generally would have the same kind of response that as long as it's not calling me certain names, I'm happy just to be called something nice. Yeah, if I read Harry Potter to you, my channel would get shut down. Um, Obviously, because I'd be breaching copyright. Yeah, I think if someone wants to be called something, then ideally, if they've let you know that, it's handy to call them that. Um, so you mentioned Stephen Fry. He obviously doesn't like being called Steve. Um, well, even reading fan fiction, the fan fiction's copyrighted to the person who wrote the fan fiction. So if they said to me, Dan, would you read my fan fiction on your channel? Then, as long as I've got that in writing, then obviously I would be able to read it. Um, but if they didn't give permission, then obviously I'd be breaching their copyright if they ended up finding out. They wouldn't sue me for so much, I'm sure. But yeah, so I've not read any of the Harry Potter books, and I've uh, watched very, very, very few of the films. If you've got fan fiction you want me to read on my channel, I would read it on my channel. Yeah, Holly, you're mentioning things that mean nothing to me. I've heard that Harry Potter is very well written, not just obviously for kids, but for anyone. People seem to largely pick it up and like how it's written, even if they're not really a fan of that kind of work. But it seems like a lot of very big books um, that would take a long time to read. And as I commented over on the Facebook group, uh, it took a very long time to get me to read any kind of book. And I ended up getting into reading Dean Koontz books, which I'm surrounded by, and have every single one. And I have a signed letter by Dean Koontz as well. I wrote to him telling him how bad it would be if he didn't reply, and I had to go without any reply, and I had to live with that, etc., etc. And he replied, obviously. Um, Whereas the address to write to him years ago said, I never reply to anyone because I get like 1,500 letters a year and I can't reply to people. Um, yeah, so I like Dean Koontz. I have finished reading his recent series of books, the Jane Hawke novels. I quite like them. I thought that was quite a good series to read. I loved the Odd Thomas ones. Um, there is Elvis, but I liked the Odd Thomas books, uh, obviously from first reading them. I just liked the characters. I liked the way they were written. Um, I liked the I don't know. I just liked them. The only kind of downside is knowing literally from about the first page that when the series ended, Odd Thomas was going to be dead, because he does say, this is I'm giving this to so and so and it will be published once I'm dead. So you know right from the outset that whatever happens, his death will eventually come at some point. Just to ruin that for anyone who hasn't read them, but it does get revealed literally on the first page virtually of the first book. And there was supposed to be, or there was going to be, a crossover with, I can't remember the character's name now, but the light character, the guy with the skin condition where he couldn't go out in sunlight. Um, Dean Koontz talked about doing a crossover where he was going to write a story that involved both characters meeting up and having to face things together. And he just never got round to it. And he finished the novels, the Odd Thomas novels, having never got round to it, because that was another couple of books that I really liked. So yeah, and Dean Koontz has a new book coming out soon. I don't know what that's going to be like. He's finished his last series of books, these Jane Hawke books. Yeah, I think so. Where he only comes out at night. Is it Fear Nothing? And I can probably see them. Seize the Night, I think. Fear Nothing and Seize the Night. Because I've got, as I say, every single one of his books here and under pseudonyms, and obviously his sci-fi ones from when he used to do the small sci-fi books that are pretty cool. Yeah, I've not read his Dark Materials either. That's another series that I think I saw one of the films. I can't remember. I think there's been a recent film. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I haven't read the books. Well, I have a lot of bookshelves surrounding me, and spinny book things. And it just happens that I'm surrounded in this corner by hypnosis books. In fact, right down this wall is therapy and hypnosis and mind type books. Apart from all the signed book, I've got lots of signed books down this side as well. Um, I have a bit of a thing for getting signed books. And for me, I love obviously really old books. I like the smell of very old, kind of 1800s and 1700s books. And old hypnosis books are so much more entertaining to look at than uh, newer hypnosis books. People are always so much better dressed in them with their moustaches and stuff and their sort of suits. Yeah, I think I've mentioned before, talking of LSD, about my experience of going to a nightclub with a friend, and I don't do drugs, and I went to a nightclub with a friend, and it was the kind of nightclub where you walk around crunching the pills that are on the ground beneath your feet. Um, and when we left the nightclub, I didn't realize that he'd taken some LSD, and we're walking along the seafront back to my flat, and he was talking about how beautiful the ocean was, and he was talking about all the sparkling colors and um, the sort of rainbow effects and all these different things. And I thought he'd finally come to his senses and was seeing the world correctly. And then the next morning, he said how trippy it was. um, he said how trippy it was and weird it was to have me treat it like the most natural, normal thing in the world, um, to be when he was in that sort of state, and that really kind of messed with his mind more. I just naturally thought he finally saw the world correctly. I didn't realize that um, he was completely off his face at the time. Um, I'm sure there's a crossover between those two 50% as well. But yeah, that was Bognor Regis. Bognor Regis, the place where I went to a nightclub with a work colleague and said, "Oh, you do realise you've accidentally got your drinks bottle in your back pocket?" And they said, "Yeah, you never know when you might need to bottle someone." I thought, great, that's a nice person to hang around with. Um, Yet the same person took mushrooms with me as well, and that just freaked them out more, to be sat with me taking mushrooms. Um, I don't know. I just get hold of signed books of as and when I see them. Uh, I don't think I've got all of the Monty Python's uh, names signed in books, so maybe one of them. Um, I've got signed stuff by Darren Brown, but I'm always happy to have another signed Darren Brown book. But I don't really. I'm trying to think if there's anyone's books that I think, oh, if only they would do one. I got David Attenborough's signature in a book. Um, I went and met David Attenborough and uh, had a chance to get a book dedicated. Yeah, you could go up. You could get two signed copies. One was going to be pre-signed by him prior to everyone coming in and getting a signed copy, and one would be signed dedicated to you when you go up to him. And so it was a friend's friend It was Abby's sister's friend, actually. Her 50th birthday, and David Attenborough is a sort of someone she really looks up to. So obviously, the signed copy, dedicated signed copy, I got to her, and I just got the normal kind of pre-signed one for myself. Yeah, I don't think I've got Hugh Laurie's signature yet, and I haven't met Hugh Laurie yet. So that's definitely someone that I'd like to meet. There's people I'd like to meet rather than worrying so much about the signature. But if they've got a book, I'd like that. Um, let's have a look. I don't know. I didn't get driven crazy. Yeah, Hugh's American accent is very good, and I don't know if you've seen his American accent in Avenue 5 or whatever this TV series is called, where he's playing a British person pretending to be an American. And so he keeps having his American accent, but when he gets really stressed, he drifts into his British accent. Um, that's quite funny. I've had a phone call from Paul McKenna. I refused to answer the phone from him. He was young on the book that I showed yesterday. Yeah, I didn't answer the phone to him, but he phoned up to say that he really liked my autobiography and just sort of spoke about that. And Abby was sat next to me telling me to answer my phone, and I was saying, no, I refuse to answer my phone. I'm not going to answer it. And not because I didn't know who was phoning, and I pretty much don't answer my phone even when I do know who's phoning. But because I need to know how the phone call is going to go before I answer it. So I've not got a signed book by Paul McKenna. I've not met Paul McKenna, but I have got a recorded answer. I've actually got the MP3 of the answer phone message of him talking about how much he likes my book and everything, which is quite nice. I just kind of wish I'd listened to Abby and actually answered the phone. Except then I wouldn't have the recording. So all swings and roundabouts. Abby is talking in the chat. I do always listen to Abby, yes. Don't always do as I'm told, but I always listen. She had to put up with me crying like a baby on our wedding day. Yeah, SMA just looks like when I sign my name now. Because of working in social care for so many years, and prior to that, I was working in care homes and things, and you'd have to sign your name hundreds of times every single day. My signature went from something that was legible to a line virtually. It's just kind of a little squiggle for the D, and then it's a bit of a line and a bit of a squiggle for the J for the beginning of Jones. And it's just like, there's another one. Yeah, or baby food formula. Yep, Abby left a comment earlier saying she might one day. I'm sure I'll be back again tomorrow. But yeah, so what is the time? 9:16. I've been here for 2 hours and 5 minutes. Now I'm just thinking of is it The Littlest Hobo? Maybe tomorrow. What, where Abby chooses what she wants to show of mine or something. But yeah, I've got quite a stack of signed books. Some from obviously famous hypnotists over the years. I've got a signed book that my granddad kept trying to buy off of me for a couple of years before he died. I'd got hold of a signed copy of a book and he kept trying to buy it, and he was offering me more and more money. And I was saying, why are you offering me more money? It's in the family. I've bought it. I've got it. It's signed. It's in the family. Why are you trying to buy my signed book? And he was saying, because I really want it at mine. And I said, yeah, but when you die, I'm going to get it. So that means that you'll be giving me money to give you a product, to give you an item that you're going to give me after you're dead. And that was a book by Lord Admiral Chatfield, who is a very distant relative who was Admiral of the Fleet at the beginning of World War II. And he wrote his two autobiographies. And I happen to have found a signed copy. And so I bought that. Yes, apparently Abby didn't like certain shirts of mine. I used to have a couple of work shirts that I always wore. So, Samuel, what you're saying is Dan looks old. So, but yes, I'm sure that you'll see Abby at some point. Yep, yesterday was, I think, 2 hours. Today I started an hour earlier, roughly, I think. But yeah, it's been 2 hours as well. But if I'm going to be here every day, I'm going to have to think of what to show and tell. Oh, I'm not blushing. Abby's obviously joined in the room. Not that they can see. I ended up buying some French fellows. This is Plock. I don't know where the other one is. We have all sorts of teddies dotted around our flat of different kinds. Obviously, we don't have kids. and we don't have pets. We're not allowed pets, so we just end up with lots of teddies and stuff instead. But normally something slightly different. So that's the friend, which is Pidoo. So I have wands, magic wands, and Abby has teddies. Yeah, a room a day would mean that I'd have to keep on unplugging everything and plugging everything in a new location. In here with me, I've obviously got my drum. That might come out one day, just to bore everyone. Perfect couple. You wait until I spend all my time annoying Abby. Yeah, my mobile phone would probably run out of battery, so I'd end up having to do short bursts. But yeah, I could easily just have a large pile of junk beside me. Obviously, within reach, I've literally got hundreds and hundreds of books. And I don't know what I can show. Spinning around, see, there's like spinny books and signed Star Wars stuff, and even more books and more books. They kind of go all around. Yeah, no hidden talent, no talent, just a drum. That's how I think about it. But I do have a collection of junk, yes. I often think about it as junk or tat, something like that. Well, I haven't got the hat in here with me to pull stuff out of, but I do have the top hat, magician's top hat. Obviously, I wrote a story about the magician's top hat, about Malcolm, who lives in the top hat, in one of my in Sleepy Bedtime Tales, the book of 11 stories to help children to fall asleep. One of them is Malcolm the rabbit who lives in the magician's hat, where the world is upside down and purple, as everyone knows. What instruments do I own? An electronic piano that was my granddad's. I did have one before that was mine, but I replaced it with granddad's when that got in here. I can't fit two in here. I've got a flute that was granddad's. He gave it to me years and years and years ago, and started teaching me to play the flute. I've got a Rav Vast drum. I've got a violin. I've got a guitar. I've got don't know what else I've got. I've probably got other bits if I could think of them, but yeah, definitely those. And I can't play any of them. I love that I come from a very musical family. At least one side of my family is very musical. It was a really kind person from Germany who watches my videos frequently, who's a violinist, and she came over from Germany, I think last summer, and gave me the violin because she knew I've always wanted to learn the violin, because that's the instrument that Grandad played, or the instrument he mainly was supposed to play, but he also played piano and he played guitar and other instruments as well. And Grandad's granddad was a professor of music who did things like he sung in the Royal Albert Hall. He did a some sort of singing show thing at the Royal Albert Hall back in 1901, I think it was, or 1899. One of the, I've got the program somewhere for it, or the news cuttings for it. Yeah, and I definitely can't sing, so that won't be happening. Let's have a look. And some of my old tracks have me playing the flute on them and playing the piano on them, or electronic keyboard thing on them. I can't play the violin. I can make it make a noise, but I can't play it. Yeah, in an ideal world, I'd like surface ornaments and things to be not there, but they find a way of getting around. What do you want to know more about? You mentioned I need to know more. That's okay, Andrew. Yes, I quite like. See, I've got books that I've had to put that way up, which I don't really like doing, but I end up running out of space. Ideally, I want everything nice and neat and everything having its home, and I'd like somewhere maybe twice the size of this room. I want an actual, real, proper, full-on library in my own home. Really. Have I watched Lie to Me? I am watching it, not at this exact moment, but currently I'm catching it. I stopped watching it halfway through season 2 because of the fact that I knew that they cut it short halfway through season 3, and I didn't want it to end, which is the most illogical thing ever, that I was watching it and then I stopped watching it so it wouldn't end. But I had been a fan of Paul Ekman's work. So for those who don't know, Paul Ekman is the guy that the guy in Lie to Me is based on. And Paul Ekman's work is about sort of micro expressions and the sort of unconscious stuff your face does and your body does. And so for years I'd been aware of his work purely to try and learn how to recognize all this stuff so that I could do better as an autistic person at reading emotions and understanding people around me. Yeah, the violin playing person was my granddad. He used to play the violin, and his older sister had perfect pitch, and she used to play piano predominantly, and the two of them together used to do lots of concerts through like the 40s 50s sort of time period. But yeah, it was his granddad who was the professor of music, Douglas Lott, and I've got a painting of him, a photocopy of a painting of him. A family member has that. But yeah, so down that side of the family, it had always been very, very musical, and then it ended up with me. So, and I was never allowed as a child. I was never allowed to play music. I obviously grew up in a household where you weren't, as a child, supposed to be seen or heard, ideally. So although I had this obsession with wanting to learn piano and wanting to learn guitar and wanting to learn all these different instruments, I was never actually in my own home allowed to do that. I always had to do that at my nan and granddad's house. So it was only when I was there that I was able to do little bits and pieces. But I shared in the Facebook group last week, I think, the photo of me being followed by the elephant, playing a sousaphone, which is about as big as I am because I'm a small child in the photo, with the elephant um, being a little aroused by this sousaphone and wrapping its trunk around me, and the sousaphone trying to sort of wrap its trunk around to this sound. And I was playing Nelly the Elephant up and down the Arundel High Street, which is a steep hill, up and down that over and over and over and over again. And I was very happy to stop playing Nelly the Elephant by the end of the day. But yeah, as a kid, I started learning things like trombone and uh, trying to think what else I learned, euphonium and stuff like that. I've only watched, I think, one episode of The Good Doctor. The violinist that gave me the violin, I don't know what orchestra she's with, but she does play, I think, in orchestras and things. And The Mentalist is very good as well. I agree with that. And I've actually been mistaken on a train once for being Simon Baker. And I thought, you don't know how close to being right you are if you come over to me, because I will probably hypnotize you or something. But a bunch of people were gossiping and saying, "Come on, you go up and ask him. He's that guy from The Mentalist. You go up and they're all gossiping and talking and about who should approach me, right up until when I got off the train. I actually had kind of scruffy hair at the time, and I was wearing a grey suit and dressed similar to how he dresses in the show, because I was going to, I can't remember, some smart family event thing, or coming back from a smart family event. Let's have a look. Yeah, my nan used to play. I can't remember what the instrument is. The accordion. My magician uncle used to play the banjo and the ukulele. Just having a look. Yeah, I've obviously got all the seasons of Lie to Me, and I obviously, that's the kind of thing I really like. So I've got like Mentalist and House and Lie to Me and Elementary and Sherlock, anything like that that's kind of linked to the kind of stuff I do. I've got sort of all of those box sets as DVDs. Yeah. Yeah, Sherlock's brilliant. I've got, you sort of mentioned about a museum of instruments. Unfortunately, my granddad was so worried about the instruments ending up just being dumped at a charity shop when he died, that before he died, he got another member of the family to sell them all off on eBay, pretty much, because he thought no one would want them. He didn't talk to me. If he talked to me, he would have found out I'd happily have them all. But he was a little bit of a hoarder of instruments and things. And so, yeah, I would happily have had them all, but he had them all sold off before sort of I managed to get my hands on them. But I do have lots of things like sheet music and stuff going back to the 1800s. And a lot of my granddad's stuff that he used and that he had, which is quite cool. So I quite like the sheet music from the 1800s. It's the same as the sheet music from now, just on different paper. But I just like the look of its old books again. Lie to me. So which of those shows do I find most accurate, sort of portraying the techniques and things? Lie to Me obviously portrays the techniques accurately, but over eggs the kind of the reality of how you could use them. So Cal Lightman can instantly be able to say, "Yep, that person's lying. Yes, that person's feeling this or that," with absolute confidence. And it's obviously not as cut and dry as that. The Mentalist again uses a lot of good techniques that looks very based on Darren Brown. Same as Elementary at times. So all of them kind of do bits right, but obviously they, a bit like my Hypnotic Assassin novel, everything in it is accurate. I've made sure all the hypnosis in my novel is correct. Everything in it, apart from killing people, is stuff that I've done in real life myself, or stuff that I know has been done frequently by hypnotists, like surgeries. I've not done surgery under hypnosis, but I know that people have done that under hypnosis. And so everything in the Hypnotic Assassin novel is correct, but what isn't correct is how successful it would be in real life. The Hypnotic Assassin in the Hypnotic Assassin novel, everyone they encounter, it just all works. Everything works the first time. Whereas in reality, that's not what would happen. In reality, there'd be people things wouldn't work so well with, certain techniques won't work out quite right. But yeah, so we're doing a band now, are we? So anyway, I will stop in a couple of minutes because or else I'll just be going on forever. Just having a look through. When a technique doesn't work out, it makes no difference. I couldn't care less. It just means I was doing the wrong thing for that individual. So it's more about a technique. Using techniques is kind of the wrong way of looking at it, because I don't really use techniques as such. You just use certain, you're sort of working with someone. But for a technique not to work out, it just means that I wasn't doing it in the right way for that individual, or maybe that individual can't do things in that specific way that I was trying to make them do things. So what normally happens is, obviously in real life, unlike say in a film or something or in a book, you might have to take slightly longer over something. You might have to do a slightly longer pause or a slightly shorter pause, or you might have to change the wording very slightly one way or another. So there are bits that you have to change for that one individual, to individualize it to that person, but also to accept that that person responds in their own unique way. So it's not so much that a technique hasn't worked, it's that maybe, for example, if I try and do an arm levitation with someone, someone may genuinely lift up their arm. Someone may lift up their arm on purpose, just choosing to do it. They may notice their arm rising on its own. They may not move their arm, but in their head, they feel like their arm has lifted up. So to me, I don't think their arm has moved, but to themselves, they think their arm has moved. Other people, you tell them to lift up their arm and it gets heavier and heavier and more stuck to their leg, and that happens to be their response. So it's more about, you present an idea, someone responds to the idea, you work out how they're responding to the idea and work with their response to present another idea, and you just build one idea on another. So it's less about an individual technique working or not, and more about a process of engagement with someone and seeing what happens next. So anyway, I'm going in just a moment, but I will read to the end of this line. So I'm about to go, as it obviously is getting late now, and I have been here for 2.5 hours, which is a long time to be talking and not even doing a sleep story or anything. Um, and thank you everyone for joining me on here. If you want, I'll be back here tomorrow night, probably the same kind of time. I came on here about 7 o'clock UK time. That's PM UK time. So I'll probably come here tomorrow evening after dinner as well. And anyone who wants to join me, feel free to pop back on here. Hopefully you'll get notifications and things, but feel free to pop back on here and I'll chat to you then. So good night, everyone, for those of you who it is nighttime, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow. See you later. Bye.